The Charles Adler Show starts now.
So I am reading a National Post column earlier this week by someone who's not a regular columnist with the Post, so it may be someone that you're not aware of. He is a lecturer at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. He's also someone who has run for office. He'll tell us more about that in just a few moments. But let me just give you the headline that blew my doors off. National Post column. It's amateur hour in Canadian politics. Time for big money. Less money means less talent and more potential to violate election rules. Now, I've got to share this with you folks because I put all my opinions in the shop window, and we're going to bring our guest on who wrote the column in just a few moments. But I have believed for the longest time that if you pay peanuts, right? If you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. Not trying to take shots at monkeys here, okay? But the point is, it doesn't matter what enterprise we're involved with. If you don't pay the right amount of money, your competitor, okay, will take most of the share of business. The political business is no different than any other business. And if it were more professional, which would require more money at all levels, I think it would be very, very helpful to democracy. Difficult to say this in a so-called populist era because so much of populism is about amateurism. So much of populism is about inveighing against the so-called elites. And so I'm going to take a big risk here in this populist era that we're in. I'm going to bring on someone from the elite, someone who is a lecturer at an elite university, the University of British Columbia, and he's the person who's pushing this. So for the people who are radical populists, you can pick on him all day long. But if you just open your mind a little bit and step outside the populist cave, I think you'll be very impressed by what this gentleman has to say. Adam Pankratz is a lecturer at UBC. He's in the Sauder Business School. Adam Pankratz, this is the first time for us on this show, or any show for that matter. Welcome to the Charles Adler Show podcast.
Well, thank you very much Charles for having me. And based on that intro, it sounds like I'm going to have a lot of fun in the next few hours or days hearing from your listeners.
The only people who don't have fun on this show, and we haven't had any of them so far, but the only ones in my career who haven't had fun are those who take themselves really, really seriously and those who are extremely reluctant to ask uncomfortable questions. And I have a reason to believe that based on what I read in your column, that you're not one of those, because this is really bold stuff. Now, before we get into the philosophy of populism and what we're up against, I just want to let people get to know you a little bit. I mentioned that you ran for office. Before you ran for office, what were you doing in your life that motivated you to seek public office?
Well, I'd been fortunate in my life that I had an early introduction to politics. My grade 9 English teacher actually had a personal relationship with Sven Robinson. And so I first sort of had that introduction to a real live politician in grade 9 English. Sven in Burnaby, whatever people think of him, and I know he was a polarizing figure in Canadian politics, but he was a great local MP. And he spoke his mind, and agree with him or not. He was someone who was really involved in the community, and we developed a friendship. And even at the time in high school, I knew I probably wasn't an NDPer, but I respected him for, his local involvement and what he did for the community. And so that was the initial introduction. And then, as I got into later years in high school and university, I volunteered on local Liberal campaigns with a great guy called Bill Cunningham, and then I went away to university. I was out of the country for a few years, but I came back and I wanted to get involved after the Liberal bloodbath of 2011. And that's when I really put my foot down, trying to get the nomination and getting involved. But it was, I guess the other part of that is, what was I doing while I wasn't running for politics? Because obviously it's not a job per se, because you don't get paid for it. I was, when I after studying, I was working in commercial banking. So I worked with Coast Capital Savings in their commercial banking division.
So some of your studies were in Germany, and I'm just wondering if Germany is where you picked up on the idea that they pay people pretty well there at all levels of politics, and their politics are very professional there. And I can just tell you in terms of my own experience, when I'm interviewing a person involved in the political system, it doesn't matter whether it's a politician, someone working for a politician, anyone involved in the political ecosystems in most Western democracies, including Germany, I get the sense that I'm dealing with someone who is professionally operating at a higher level with more experience. Was that your experience as a student, a master's student in Germany?
I wouldn't say exactly, but what I would say is that I think in Canada very often, and this would apply not just to politics, I think it also applies to other issues where there's controversy about any type of privatization or money, like our healthcare system. What I would say is that being in Europe, particularly continental Europe, is often held up as an example, rightly so, of where money doesn't enter into it, or privatization and corporate concerns are less of a problem. I think when you're there, you realize that's not really the case, right? Germany has private healthcare. Germany has more money in Canadian politics, and the mistake I think we make in Canada is that we're next to the elephant, right? We look at the United States and we say, oh my God, I don't want that. And so we react, kind of violently and say, well, whatever the United States is doing, I should do the opposite of that. And that might be the case sometimes, right? But a lot of the time it isn't. And I think bringing a balance back to how we view ourselves, in terms of establishing our own policies rather than just making them reactionary and saying, sometimes privatization in the healthcare system could be good. That works in Germany, right? Despite they have a high tax base and is a very equal society. More money in politics could be good, right? That's the case. They pay politicians more in Germany. You can donate more, things like that, right? So it's more just, I think when you're there, you see what is actually going on the ground. And that, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing proposition in reaction to whatever the United States is doing.
Let me ask a totally unfair question here, because you mentioned Sven Robinson, who was a very, very famous NDPer. And the NDP is the party in this country that is most vehemently for the union position on healthcare and how healthcare is applied. And it's the party that always brings up the issue around the United States and how much of the American system is a nightmare, lots of horror stories, and the assumption that if we had more privatization in the delivery of healthcare, we would have a replica of the United States. And when the idea is proposed, well, wait a minute, what about the Germans? What about the French? What about the Belgians? What about the rest of the world outside of maybe, I don't know, North Korea or Cuba? The NDP always goes back to the American example. So I'm just wondering, do you suspect that if Sven Robinson wasn't worried about his NDP colors, that he might agree with his good friend Adam Pankratz on this?
I certainly won't pretend to speak for him. I don't think so, based on my conversations with Sven on that. I don't think so. I mean, I don't know if his views have changed since last time we spoke, but I very much doubt it.
All right, so let's move off of healthcare and the money involved in Europe in healthcare, and the fact that the people who are very, very pro-public sector accept the idea that there is what in Canada is known as two-tier healthcare, and they're not worried about the American bogeyman. It's got nothing to do with how they proceed and how they've got much smaller waiting lists and better outcomes, etc. We'll move off that back to the Canadian example. Something happened in your own backyard in BC that motivated you to write this stellar piece about how it's amateur hour for politics in Canada, not necessarily only because there's not enough money in it, but money is a factor. Please follow the money. What happened in British Columbia, as I say, in your own backyard?
Well, the campaign finance rules were changed relatively recently, and issues around donations in municipal politics changed specifically. And what happened, the big high profile, why it sort of caught people's attention, was because one of the candidates for Vancouver mayor, Mark Marison, was caught and found guilty basically of violating the campaign finance rules. I hasten to add, I don't personally think Mark did this intentionally. I find it surprising because Mark is a political veteran, and I think a lot of people were surprised that he wouldn't have got the information correct. But what he said was that he was a victim of bad legal advice. That may sound to some like a convenient excuse. My involvement with politics, or just being sort of more in the environment, I actually think that's probably quite likely. There are very few, very few professionally paid, election lawyer experts, even at high levels. There's a lot of volunteerism, and that's great. That people are donating their time, but it's still, money talks, right? You said it at the beginning. And, I don't know the situation exactly what happened in terms of that, how that advice was given, but it wouldn't surprise me that, it may not have been super high priority because it's part of a volunteer campaign or a very part-time thing. And we end up with these unfortunate situations where, as far as I'm concerned, people who didn't have malintent, they're trying to navigate difficult and complicated election laws and find money any way they can, ran afoul of the rules. And they did that. That's fine. But the rules, in my view, in terms of the ability of people to donate to campaigns, should be different. In that they should be able to donate more, right? It should be easier to raise funds. And right now that's not the case. And I think it leads to unfortunate outcomes. And I think it makes it hard to run a professional campaign. And that contributes to a less robust and less professional debate when it comes to our democracy. And I think that's too bad.
Let's get right to government. We have a situation which is only a few weeks old, where you've got a public safety minister in Canada saying that he did not know that Paul Bernardo was being transferred, and it wasn't until he was transferred that the public safety minister, Mendocino, said that he found out. Very few people believe that, but I'm just asking you now, as someone who says that politics is amateur hour in Canada. You also ran for the Liberal Party, ran unsuccessfully. Would you say that we should open our minds to the possibility that the minister might have been telling the truth, and that it was amateur hour in him not knowing that Paul Bernardo, one of the most famous serial killers in Canadian history, was being transferred from maximum to medium?
I mean, that one is surprising. I've never run a government department, obviously. So I'm going to say that it's at least possible he didn't know. But, I think the issue is more not, did he or didn't he? It's the people that are attracted to politics with regards to the money. And I think that, politics right now, although we do want to view it as a public service, and I understand that regard, or that notion, it is it's the reality is that finance and money attract better people, right? I mean, if you have more money, you're going to attract a higher quality of candidate. And I think there is definitely an issue in politics where if it's just not attractive to people who are very highly qualified, and if they're doing really well in their career, what is the incentive to go into politics and go into this circus where your whole life is going to be opened up to the public, not only your whole current life, but also your whole past, and everything you may have said anything you may have said to somebody, even if it's only an allegation, what is the reward? I get that a lot of people are going to say, well, the reward is you are a member of the government or you're a minister, and that is a reward in and of itself. I agree, but I think the lack of remuneration is such that we're not probably attracting maybe the highest talent that we could, and there's a lot of room, I think, to raise salaries if we wanted to go down that route. My piece was more about donations, but if we wanted to raise salaries, I think there's a lot of there's a good discussion that could happen there as well.
So before we get to donations, which was your original intent, I want to stay with this business of the public safety minister. And the reason I'm staying with this is because this is a case that everyone listening knows about. It's impossible not to know that Paul Bernardo has been transferred to medium security. And I'm not suggesting in any way that that means that the public is being threatened, that the medium security institution that he's in is somehow fragile, vulnerable, and that Paul Bernardo will be back on the streets. That's not where I'm going at all. I think the average Canadian, though, does want Paul Bernardo to be as isolated as possible in a maximum security cell, and they don't care that that makes him uncomfortable or unhappy. That's not the issue for most Canadians. They want him to be punished to the max, and so they're upset with what happened here. So let's talk about the public safety minister position and any other cabinet position. Would you say that if a cabinet minister was being paid closer to $500,000 as opposed to the current, I'm just giving you the ballpark estimate, of $200,000, do you think we'd get better policy and possibly fewer incidents like the one we're discussing? Would it make a difference if we had more money to pay a public safety minister? Would we get someone who's more talented, possibly more responsible, and someone who would not get the government and the public into the row that we've been in over this situation?
Personally, I do think so. And I think that would apply as well to any staffers that person has. I think, money doesn't eliminate the possibility that people are unaware of certain things or do something stupid. There's enough examples around the world of that, but I think it does, maximize the chance that a very qualified person or a more qualified person is involved. So it doesn't, it's not, we're never gonna have a scandal-free or a dumb decision-free political environment. That's just not realistic. But I do think we can minimize that, and remuneration at a higher level is part of that.
Let me ask you a question that revolves around media. Do you think media should be doing more stories about the incredibly talented people in Canada? Even though this podcast is heard around the world, it's just the nature of online delivery. But let's just focus on Canada here. Is it possible that if media did more stories on talented people who have chosen not to get into public life because they just don't want to work for peanuts being relative to the kind of money they can get in the private sector, if media did more stories on that, would that advance democracy?
I think there's an argument to be made that it could. That's something perhaps that might be interesting. It's hard to find the people who weren't interested or who didn't want to do it. But I can speak to just my own situation, right? Like where my career has gone. And without giving away all the personal details, my salary's gone up, right? As my career has advanced, as I'm sure is the case with a lot of people. Well, as that happens, or as you have a family, or as your situation in life stabilizes, like in anything, well, like the risk premium goes up, right? Like, well, what am I going to open myself up to? Why would I do that? The kind of tragic thing politically is, well, you probably want experienced people who are doing really well in their careers to go into politics. And the harder that decision becomes for them, then you're going to end up with, or there's a higher likelihood. Just basic math would tell us. There's just a basic math thing that you're going to get people who are you're going into politics sort of for the, this is the best job they'll ever have. And that's not necessarily a good thing either, right? And that, I think, leads to more divisive politics, more of the identity politics, which I really can't stand, that we currently live with, and just decisions that are ideologically based, not common sense or done for the best interest of the country.
So a number of years ago, you ran as a Liberal candidate in British Columbia in what I'll call an NDP-ish kind of riding, one of those ridings where either the NDP wins or the Liberal, and if the Liberal wins, it's let's just say a relatively left of center Liberal. So you ran there. You ran up against an NDP candidate who ended up beating you and later became the mayor of Vancouver. Here's the question. That was then. This is now. There will be another election in a year or two. 2025 is the much more logical day, because that's when the NDP agreement with the Liberals essentially runs out, and it's time for another election. Fine. So, if, just as a hypothetical, if you were reached out to run for the Liberals again in 2 years from now, Adam Pankratz, would you be very reluctant to do it, not because you didn't think that you had a good chance of winning, but because there's a very good chance that you cannot make the money in politics, you cannot make the money as a member of parliament and even a cabinet minister that you can doing what you're doing right now?
Well, so just before I answer that, I'll say that NDP-ish riding, I think it's been NDP now for 49 or 50 years. So it's a heavy duty NDP riding. It's a pretty theoretical question. I think some of the things I've said and written now that I'm sort of a bit more free outside of the Liberal Party, I don't know if I'll be getting that invitation, but but would I be reluctant? And would it be a much more difficult decision? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, it would be. And would a higher salary in politics change that? Probably. But I don't foresee myself doing that in 2 years for a number of reasons, but certainly one of which is, what is the risk that I'm running the other way? And some people may just say, well, that makes me a chicken. And I accept that. Maybe I've passed into that level of where my career is with 2 young kids. So maybe I am a little bit at the moment, but that's a problem, right? Like that is a problem, that it shouldn't be, politics ought to be, at least in my mind, a noble and professional, occupation that people want to be involved in. And the current environment, monetarily, and also with the associated risk of social media and what comes with it, it's really unattractive, I think, at the moment in a lot of ways. There's no question. It's also one of the best experiences of my life, right? Like running. I loved it. I love getting to see the community, and I don't doubt that if I had been elected, I would have had that even more so. So I see both sides of it, but I think the more attractive we can make it, ultimately, the better people will get, and that will serve the country better.
But at the moment, based on everything you're telling us right now, at the moment, money is a big part of why you would likely not want to secure a Liberal nomination.
I mean, the trade-off for the risk, the money certainly is not there. No way.
All right, and I put not just my opinions in the shop window, but my mistakes, because to err is human. I erred, and I'll tell you why I erred about thinking that your writing was NDP-ish, because you were obviously in South Burnaby. You said Burnaby. I related to it as North Burnaby, where I used to live. And in my writing, as you know very well, the writing that I used to live in, sometimes an NDPer wins and sometimes a Liberal wins. A Liberal happens to have that writing right now. So my apologies to you on projecting. When it came to Burnaby, we've got 2 writings with Burnaby in them. You're in the writing that is not just NDP-ish. You were in the writing that is NDP, very safe. And I was in the one that was, sometimes Liberal, sometimes NDP. So we've cleared that up, and I appreciate the the correction. Let's get back to the donation issue. What's the connection that you want to make? And I want to give you more time on this than we had at the very, very beginning. But what is the connection that you want to make on the capacity for people to donate money and the kind of politics that we get and how it impacts on democracy?
Okay. Well, what I would just simply start with is highlighting two numbers, just to demonstrate the differences we're talking about between Canada and the United States. So in the most recent federal election, all parties together, right, spent $82.9 million. Okay? In the 2020 presidential election, the estimated spend was 14.4 billion. Okay. So on our federal election, we spent 82.9 million. For the presidency, there was a spend of 14.4 billion. So that's a difference of 173 times. That's like ridiculous, right? Most of the time we look at the United States and we sort of say, well, we should probably be a tenth of that, right? We're a tenth the size population. We're a tenth in a lot of things. That's a pretty standard Canadian conversion. So we're 173 times behind the United States. Now, I am, just to be clear, right? I think the United States has its problems too. Unlimited donations leads to unwanted outcomes and would lead to undue influence or too large an influence of money or rich people in politics. And that's not desirable either. But I think from where we are to 14.4 billion, there is a middle ground somewhere, right? So could we increase our spend 10 times without running too afoul of overindulgence and over-influence of money? I don't think that's that crazy a thing to say. Obviously I'm saying it, so I don't think so. But the current maximum donation that someone can make to a campaign is $1,700 per year. Well, if that were $15,000 or $20,000, I think democracy would actually be well served, and you would get more professional campaigners, more professional staff. Probably more professional candidates who would have a better time raising money, an easier time raising money, could produce more sophisticated communications material, could reach out to Canadians better to understand what it is they are interested in and what it is they want. And I think you would also have local independent candidates who had a better time and an easier time raising money and would not be so beholden in a lot of ways or so desperate for any type of help and financing that they might get from the federal parties. And that would hopefully lead to more local independence and more strong local MPs, which I also think would be a very positive addition to our current political situation. So I think there are potentially a lot of benefits, and back to what set this off, better advice, right? Better advice as to what candidates are permitted to do, how they're permitted to do it, and just an all around more professional class of Canadian political actors.
Adam, over the years, have you gotten contacted by people inside the political system? I don't care whether they're liberal, NDP, conservative, it doesn't matter, because this is a general thing, and it's something that I picked up on simply doing what I do for a living over the years. And I picked up on this, as I say, it's not partisan. Conservative people who had to hire staff, liberals, NDPers, and others have told me that it's very, very difficult, Chuck, very difficult to hire staff because the money that is available simply is money that only relatively inexperienced people want. It's very hard to hire people who are successful in the private sector to work for different government operations, whether it's provincial, municipal, or federal. Is that something that Adam Pankratz had picked up on over the years?
Absolutely, 100%. Let's say there are candidates who don't have that problem. Justin Trudeau does not have problems raising money. Leaders of of leaders of federal parties, high-ranking cabinet ministers. Okay, fine. That's a very small percentage of the politicians who are out there, and even they don't start out that way, right? You're not a cabinet minister until you are. So it is very, very difficult, and people are relying on anybody they can get. I mean, why was I volunteering, in high school and in university? Well, because I had no experience, I couldn't command any money at all, because I was happy to have a chance to have the fact that I'd been involved on my resume, and I liked the local candidate. But that situation plays out over and over and over again. And it's not an exaggeration, I wouldn't say, to say that a lot of the times the financial agents of a lot of these candidates are, their friend or their aunt or somebody who really does not have the expertise or the ability to navigate complicated election laws. And that doesn't serve the system well. It doesn't serve the candidate well. It doesn't serve Canadians well. And you can pick any position on local campaigns. These people are working hard. They're trying their best, right? I don't doubt for 1 second the intent and the good nature and the hard work that anybody who runs for any political campaign puts in, whether you're independent, Green, NDP, Conservative, or Liberal. But the fact is the resources aren't there, right? And so you don't get the quality of people who understand this stuff well enough to do it at a high level. And that hurts the local ridings, that hurts Canadians, and that hurts the system.
Moving off the campaign, though, I'm talking about government as well. Do you get the sense, and do you get information from people in various parties who are running governments, municipal, provincial, federal, that it's very difficult to hire people to come into a government to do the important work that needs to be done? No, we don't see them. They're in the background, but they're the people who are responsible for making sure that our governments run efficiently, and they're the ones who make sure that leaders, and that includes cabinet ministers, have the information, have the resources they need. If we were paying more money, would we be getting better people? And is this a complaint that you're getting from people? I'm not talking about the campaign. I'm talking about actual government. Is this something that your radar is picking up on?
Yeah, for sure. I think that pay, in a lot of important government functions politically, like you're saying, to get the information to the ministers, whoever it be, is not that high. And I get that that's not a cry that any politician wants to make, right? They don't want to go out and stand on the hustings and say, I should be earning twice as much and I'm going to make that decision. And so should my staff, right? Okay. I understand that is not the political message people want, but this is important stuff, right? Politics isn't a game at the end of the day. I get that we make fun of it all the time. I certainly do. We roll our eyes at all kinds of weird and crazy things that happen because that's normally what makes the headlines. But our everyday lives are affected by this stuff. And if we're not providing financial resources to ensure that we have the best people possible making those decisions, attracting the type of person who wants to be involved, who has the background, has the training to make these big time spending or big time impactful decisions, well, we're going to get bad decisions. We're going to get difficult. We're going to get bad policy. I mean, and if you doubt that government policy affects our lives, right? A lot of the time, like you say, it's in the background. It happens. We don't necessarily see it out in our face. Well, how about COVID, right? If you were mad or you disagreed about COVID policies, whichever side you were on, I don't care. That was like, what more blatant example do you need of, in that situation, I want the absolute best person making the decision. And, they might be wrong on occasion, but at the very least, I have some assurance that they were making the best decision they possibly could, and knew how to interpret the information and knew how to communicate and we're dealing the best as they possibly could for the public, right? That is what I say. Go back to COVID. Were you happy? If you weren't, if you were, you wanted the best person, right? And it's that simple.
So to get back to what we were discussing at the very, very beginning, because it's the backdrop for everything these days. You talk about your piece in the National Post where politics in Canada is amateur hour. Is it possible that we're in a conundrum here because populism, in its very nature, celebrates the amateur, celebrates the person without a lot of experience, without a lot of education, and actually attacks people like you, people who work at universities, attacks people like me who are in the so-called mainstream media and have been for decades. And populism seeks out those people who are rougher around the edges. Is it difficult in that kind of environment, Adam Pankratz, to advocate the idea of making politics much more professional, allowing donations to be larger, and paying more for staff, and in fact paying more for politicians? Is this the wrong time? Not suggesting that there's anything wrong with what you wrote. It's terribly stimulating, and I feel it's important, and I absolutely agree with you. But I can put that to the side and simply ask, is this the wrong time to be advocating what you're talking about?
I mean, possibly. Populism, whatever we mean by that is on the rise, right? It certainly seems. But I would say I think it's important in all of this stuff to be self-reflective as well, right? That the so-called elites have brought some of this on themselves by sort of refusing to countenance anything that people who are not part of that clique might have to say, and that they might be being affected in ways that the elites can't fathom, right? I think that's certainly something that I find troubling sometimes out of universities, to be perfectly honest. Is we spend a lot of time talking about people need to be aware of their biases and take account of those when they make decisions, which I agree with. But that goes for universities as well, right? That we need to be aware that I have biases. There's no way that I couldn't, and there's no way that anyone doesn't. It's not good or bad to have a bias. You just have them, and to be aware of them is an important factor in making good decisions. But so is it probably more difficult right at the moment when inflation is on the rise? The Bank of Canada has just raised interest rates, and the average Canadian, as we probably would refer to them is a poor descriptor, but the average Canadian, the regular Canadian, is suffering and feeling the pinch on their wallets. It's probably not a great time to say for a politician to stand up and say, I should be making more money, or we should be putting more money into the pockets of politicians and political staffers. But I think the long-term effect of that is you get worse policy, and you get poor decisions made, which ultimately then have those long-term negative effects on Canadians. And I think at the end of the day, that's where my argument is okay. Well, I'm honestly less concerned about the politicians' bank account than I am about the decisions they make, which affect everyday Canadians, right? And that's what I want to see. Is I want my answer to the mob with pitchforks when they come to my office door will be, I want this system to have more money in it because it's going to make your lives better, right? That's what my view is. The better people that are in charge, the better everyone is going to be off, regardless of whether you view or feel that you are part of an elite. You're going to be better off if you have qualified and good people making those decisions. And by the way, right? I mean, those people could come from anywhere. That we want representation from all different backgrounds in politics. And by allowing easier routes of funding, right, it's very possible that you open up or encourage people from different backgrounds who might be totally disinterested at the moment, you might actually encourage them to be involved in the political process more, and that would be a good thing, because that would get more diverse views, that would get more diverse people with diverse backgrounds involved, and that would be more representative of what Canada is, and more representative of who those policies affect. And I can't see that being a bad thing.
So your column went online more than 3 days ago. All right. So let's just take the round number, 72 hours. In the last 72 hours, what kind of feedback has Adam Pankratz had to his proposal to put more money at all levels, donations, salaries, to put more money into Canadian politics? The feedback.
Well, really, it's been you, Charles. I mean, you've been certainly the biggest person who's by far, obviously, who's come and asked. I think this is something that is a little bit obscure. That a lot of people sort of say, well, campaign finance rules. Do I really want to be interested in that? Again, it hides in the background. People from politics that I know have said, oh, that's actually, I agree with you, right? I do agree with you. But I get more feedback on, I guess you say, other more popular / populist type topics. Obscure finance rules for Canadian elections doesn't always arouse the passions as one might hope.
Well, it arouses my passions, and I'll tell you why. I've been doing the business in general for 50 years, but for more than 30 years, I've been doing a lot of public affairs talk, whether it's TV or radio, and different parts of the country, different parts of the United States, and it's just something that I have always found frustrating. That the staff, I could just do the Canadian thing here and say they're all trying very hard and their hearts are in the right place, blah blah blah. I don't want to waste the public's time on that. There is a much more professional environment in other countries. Some of them are in Europe. Yes, there's the United States. I get that the United States politics is intensely polarized and we've got issues there, but that's not about the staffing. That's not about the professionalism of the staffing. And so it bothers me because the Canadian passport is the document I treasure the most, and I am a proud Canadian. So it really, really bugs me that our politics is much more amateur at all levels than politics in other countries. And so along comes Adam Pankratz, this lecturer at the University of British Columbia at the Sauder School, and you put it out there in black and white, very plainly for everyone to see. And I guess I don't particularly care if some of my colleagues, if I can call them that in media, are interested enough to contact you. But I really, really wanted to have a conversation with you, and I am absolutely thrilled to have it. I want to give you the last word on this, a pitch, whether it's about campaign donations, whether it's about salaries that we pay. I just want you to speak directly to the public on what it is that galvanizes your emotions and takes you, in this particular case, to the National Post platform to say, folks, whether you like it or not, Canadian politics is amateur hour.
Well, my pitch to Canadians, first and foremost, is to get involved and care about your politics, whether that's local, provincial, or federal. It is easy to be involved. There's lots of room for all different viewpoints, and it's something that affects your lives. So my first thing I would say to Canadians is get involved and care about this stuff, because we need your voice. We need your opinions, and politicians and parties of all stripes want to hear from you. So get involved and care about this. Young or old, especially young, as I always say to my students, please get involved. We need young, qualified, intelligent people involved in politics. And when you're there, tell the politicians, tell your local representatives, I'm in favor of higher donation limits. I'm in favor of paying politicians more, because I understand that the decisions you guys are making are having big effects on my lives, and I want to make sure that the very best decisions are getting made.
Adam Pankratz, thank you very much for everything you're doing.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Adam Pankratz is a guest lecturer at the Sauder School of Business at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. I just want to thank everyone who's tuning into this. I want to thank you for passing the word on to your friends, your neighbors, your family, to your conscience, to be what we used to call a subscriber. Now we just call it a follower. So whether you're following on Apple or Google or Spotify, it really doesn't matter. I'm just glad that you're tuning in to the Charles Adler Show podcast. Thank you very much.
Catch Charles Adler Mondays on Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson, twice a week in the Winnipeg Free Press, and every day at criermedia.co.